Today's video is about what is an inking brush for inking comics. I'm not even going to get into how to use one just yet. I'm going to show you exactly what one is. And traditionally, it's a watercolor brush. And traditionally, it's this specific watercolor brush, a Winsor Newton Series 7 Sable brush. Mine is you can see here the size is a number 3. Some inkers like a number 2, which is a little smaller. But here's a brand new one. It's a red sable brush where the hair comes to a point. And like I said, traditionally these are used for watercolor. And a good watercolor brush will last you a lifetime if properly cared for. Unfortunately, putting a watercolor brush into India ink is not caring for it properly. India ink destroys watercolor brushes. Once you start using one to ink your work, a brush like this will last you anywhere from a couple of months to a couple of years. It really varies incredibly. And when I all through my 20s, I tried to keep my inking brushes as clean as possible. I soaped them after I used them. I did everything to make the brush last longer, but it never seemed to help. I think all that trying to keep my brush clean actually had the opposite effect. Matter of fact, there's a famous discussion that went on between, I think it was Will Eisner and Joe Kubert, about how to properly take care of a brush. And I think it was Joe Kubert who said the only way to clean an inking brush is by snipping it with scissors, meaning there was no way to clean an inking brush. And I've kind of embraced that, in that I never wash my ink brushes anymore. As you can see, there's ink built up on the ferrule. That's the metal part here of my brush from using it all the time. I'll scrape that off every now and then. And I always, when I'm done using it, I rinse it in a little jar of water. I'll rinse it off all the time, but I'll never actually take soap and water to my brush. I'll rinse it off in the jar of water, I'll put it back in my stand, and that's it. So I almost never clean my brushes anymore. If I want to get this ink off the ferrule, I usually come with a X-Acto knife and just scrape the ink off the metal part. Don't scrape the hairs. Scrape the ink off the metal part until it's gone. And also, since I do watercolors also, I like to keep my watercolor brushes, my ink brushes, separate, of course. So what I do is I actually mark, so it's almost gone here, I mark my ink brushes by taking my X-Acto knife and cutting a groove around the top of the barrel. My groove here has already been filled in with ink, so you can't see it on the camera too well, but I'll recut it. So that's what I do. I just cut a groove so that now you can see a white groove around there. It looks like it chipped a little too. This one's old. So now I know that this is an ink brush. And when it's an ink brush, I still save my bad ink brushes too. And when it's an ink brush that doesn't have a tip anymore, I put a second groove around it. So I know if it's got no groove, it's a watercolor brush. Don't dip it in ink. If it's got one groove, it's a good to go inking brush. If it's got two grooves, it's not going to come to a point anymore. And that's how inking brushes stop working when you dip it in the ink and instead of coming to a point, the top splits. And so now you're making two lines with it instead of one. But I can still use those for other purposes. I use them for oil paint sometimes too. And I also have This one right here, you can see that one's crazy never. You can't come that. Matter of fact, there's a big glob of dried ink down the bottom, keeping it from ever coming to a point. But that is what I do dry brush techniques with, like this monster face, where I'll dip this in, it'll make 25 little points, and I'll use those 25 little points to draw. And also, these Winsor Newton Series 7 brushes are expensive. They're about $20 to $30 for a number 3. I think they're up closer to $30 now because they're made out of red sable hair. And in the United States, due to certain laws with endangered species, somehow the sable that you make brushes out of got on the endangered species list, even though it's not an endangered species. So watercolor brushes were banned in the U.S. for... I think they're just stopping the ban now. For the last 2 years, it's been very hard to get inking brushes because you had to order them from overseas because you couldn't legally sell them in the U.S. anymore. It's been quite a pain. But these are also short handle brushes. The handle's about, what is that, 7-8 inches long. Here's a long handled brush. The handle's about 12 inches long. So you're going to be looking for a short-handled Winsor Newton Series 7, number 2 or number 3. I also tried some different brands, like Da Vinci. Here's one. Like I said, these have been very hard to get and very expensive, these Series 7s. And occasionally they have other brands of that are almost as good, like this Da Vinci. I find this number 5 seems to be more around the size of a number 3, maybe, because some of these brush sizes are, unless you're buying the same brand, they can be off. And I also, where's the other brand I like? Here we go. This brand with the orange tail is it's a Raphael. Raphael to me makes kind of the second best. After the Winsor Newton Series 7, the Raphael number 3s. I like these too. Let's see, there we go, Raphael. Once again, these ones were hard to get too. That's why I ended up with these. And then here's another one. This is an example of why you can't trust brush sizes on these off brands. This is a number 3 on, what off brand is this? On Princeton, does that say? I'll have to look. Yeah, Princeton, I think it says. And that's nowhere near the size. That's about a third smaller than the Raphael or the Winsor Newton, which means it holds less liquid and less ink in the top, so you have to dip it more often. And I've noticed the other brand brushes often they don't spring back as well as the Winsor Newtons. So if you're looking to ink with a brush, this is the one. Winsor Newton Series 7 brushes. I like the number 3. That's kind of the traditional one. Some inkers go for the number 2, slightly smaller. But I find I can make all the same lines with a number 3 that anyone can with a number 2. And you don't have to dip it as often because it holds more ink. But anyway, I hope that helped you out. There's a look at what exactly a comic book inking brush is.